And welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. A few days ago, Russian court has found 5 Crimean Tatars guilty of participation in the Hizb ut-Tahrir organization. They were sentenced to 12 up to 17 years in a penal colony. Human rights defenders and activists believe this is just another sign of persecutions Russia uses against Crimean Tatars. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Vladimir Zhbankov. He's a lawyer and an expert at the House of Free Russia in Kyiv. Hello and thank you for joining.
Hi.
So why Hizb ut-Tahrir organization? Russia vividly uses this precise organization to persecute Crimean Tatars, even though this organization is vividly banned around the world and in many other countries. However, it's not that persecuted.
Mm-hmm. It's not only Hizb ut-Tahrir. Russian persecutions created few organizations of Islamic terrorism or something like this, they think. And it's not a reason, but it's a model to make big actions in Crimea against Crimean Tatars, against activists and so on. And last case we saw that persecution asked court to make them to take them in jail for 10 or more years, but court decided to give more than asked persecutors, and this is maybe first big case that I saw for last many years.
Mm-hmm. We also have some points of view of the eyewitnesses of the latest court hearing, so let's take a listen.
One glance at this trial is enough to understand that we're not tried for a crime. We are tried for just being part of the nation which has preserved its ground despite any difficulties. Each of them said that it's nothing but political persecution of them personally and of the entire Crimean Tatar nation, which they're trying to label as terrorists in the 21st century. This already happened in 1944, when they tried to label our nation as traitors. They expressed their attitude towards this absolutely trumped-up criminal case.
From what can be easily tracked out of these trials and the previous ones and the whole process of the persecution of Crimean Tatars, they're being more and more persecuted for religious reasons. Now, why are Russian law enforcers doing that? Is it because it's easier to hide from the pressure that could be applied by the international community? Because religious sphere is slicky.
First, it's a big Soviet tradition, because repressions against Crimean Tatars, the history of it, we can see maybe 100 years, and because this society has its own culture and their own way of life, and when you are trying to make some totalitarian society, you need to prevent any ways of life that are not living in your totalitarian scene, yeah? And this category, and when you make these cases, there are very many tortures and other procedural crimes from prosecutors, and this story is not last 5 years. It's a very long and big story from 30s of 20th century, and I hope that is the last season of this big movie.
What could be the real reason behind this whole process of persecution that, as you have already mentioned, lasts for over 30 years? Is it because the Russian Empire wants to get the Crimean Tatars out of Crimea, which is illegally annexed, or is it because what they're doing right now, I mean, the trials, they want to scare the rest of the population living in the annexed Crimea?
As far as I can see, this category of people is the best victim for Russia regime in Crimea, because they have their own culture, they have their own specific religion, and they are, for the most part of people of Russia, they are aliens. And when you put them in jail, when you make tortures and so on, the most part of society maybe could not put itself on their place. And it is the best way for victimization of this category.
All right, how could Crimean Tatars or the whole population of Ukraine could withstand with such a pressure with the help of international community? But since the international community is doing practically nothing except for expressing deep concerns now, how can we accumulate our strengths and powers in order to protect Crimean Tatars and other Ukrainian citizens who are also being persecuted, but they are called prisoners of war or political prisoners?
It's a very good question for judicial science, for whole world community. What could we do now, or what we could do in future to somehow prevent these awful crimes against ethnic minorities, against people
not only
in
prevent,
Crimea.
but actually to make sure that those who are involved in committing those crimes are punished afterwards?
As now we can see methods, firstly it's the politics of sanctions from world community. Secondary, it is the NGOs sector, non-governmental organization could somehow help, or maybe try to save somebody, to move them in another place, another safe place. Or I think that every person who is involved in this situation could maybe be creative and find the small step, but every day somehow find the ways to involve on this situation.
On the governmental level, what could be done to keep the rest of the world informed about the real situation that is happening in the next Crimea with the indigenous people of Crimean Tatars?
Thank you. You're right. The first step is to keep informed the whole world community, from Australia to Brazil, from Alaska to New Zealand. It is the first step, but it is not a decision. It is only the basic part, and then all scientific society, society of lawyers, and international organization should somehow create methods. But for now, we doesn't have them.
How realistic is I would say the desire of the Ukrainian officials to get Crimea back?
It is a question for years and years.
Should we stay on the diplomatic path, or should we...
It is the question of Russian regime. When we have in Russia such regime as we have, there is no way. But we can see the process that Russian regime became secure every month, and we can see from people of Russia that they doesn't want to keep situation like we can see it for now. And I think that for last maybe year or 2 years we can see some evolution from Russian civil society. Very specific, maybe it is slow, maybe the most part of people could not see it as a new stage, but I believe that in maybe 2 or 5 years in the future we can see some progress in this sphere.
Thank you so much for coming here and expressing your point of view. That was Vladimir Zhbankov. He is a lawyer and an expert at the House of Free Russia in Kyiv. Thank you so much for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.